All right, so I got a lot of questions about physics classroom and specifically this concept builder charge interactions. Now this question here is from the wizard level, but the process would be the same for any level. And so I'm going to make an attempt to walk through what you might do here. And it gives you some initial information. It tells you that A is negative and that object A and B repel. So that tells you the only way things repel is if they are negative, negative, or positive, positive. That's the only two ways. Since A is negative, then that tells us that B has to be negative. Now if we move on, it says B, and C attract. Now there's actually three ways that objects attract. And those three ways are positives and negatives, or positives and neutrals, or negatives and neutrals. All three of these would attract. And so you got to walk through the possibilities. And so what do we have that would attract a negative? So here's something that would attract a negative, and here's something that would attract a negative. So based on that information thus far, C could be positive or negative. Now, if we move on, first C and D repel. Since C and D repel, that's going to automatically tell us that they have to either be both positive or both negative. So that tells us that D could be still positive or negative. Now if we move on to D and E, it says object D and E attract. Now what all can attract to a positive? A negative can attract to a positive, and a neutral can attract to a positive. So down here you would say, well, it could then be negative. It could be neutral. Now, what all can attract to a negative? And again, we go up here, and so we could find that a positive can attract to a negative, and a neutral can attract to a negative. We already have neutral down here and negative, so we need to also add positive. Now if we move on to the final one, E and F, they attract. What kinds of things could be attracted to a negative? Well, it could be a positive. It could be a neutral, because if E ends up being a negative or a positive, it could attract to a neutral. Or if it ends up being neutral or positive, it could be a negative. So all three of those would work. Now, object F and a neutral object attract each other. What that tells us is an additional piece of information. Since neutral and neutral can't attract, that would eliminate neutral as an option for F. So that would be your final answer for something like that. I will tell you a really, really, really common place I've seen mistakes on this is when we deal with this attraction, is realizing that sometimes it actually can be all three of those because of the options that would go. For example, if something could be negative or neutral and something is attracted to it, to something that's negative or neutral, it's important to note that if it's negative, then it could be positive or neutral and attract to it. But if it were to be neutral, it could actually be negative as well. And so if something could be negative and neutral, there's actually three options. This right here is where I've seen the most mistakes, going from these two to these three on a lot of these. Thanks. Hope that helps. Come see me if you still need help.